Welcome back, everyone, to A Gentleman's Life. Sam here again, and today we're going to be doing a watch review. And this one has been probably the most requested watch review over time from my collection, so I'm finally getting around to it. And up for review today is my vintage Seiko 6105 dive watch from the 1970s. So for those who don't follow vintage watches that much, the 6105 is probably the most iconic of Seiko's divers. It is really, of today's Seikos, this was the, following on from this, is how we got to the SKX 007. So Seiko kind of has their entry-level divers and then their professional divers. And this was the second entry-level diver they released, following the first model, commonly known as the 62 Moss. I can't remember the exact reference number on that one. And then you had the 6105 in a couple different variants. You had first a slightly smaller diameter symmetrical cushion case, and then after a couple of years they made this, a slightly larger diameter asymmetrical cushion case. Each of those had two reference numbers. One of those reference numbers was for the Japan market, and the other reference number was for the rest of the world, which was then followed on by the 6309, or 6306, and then 6309. And then after the 6309 is when you came to the SKX 007. So that's kind of the heritage and family history of Seiko entry-level divers in a nutshell. But the 6105 specifically is probably the most iconic, well-known Seiko diver that's been created throughout the years. So that's what we're going to get into today. I want to give a little bit of history about this watch and how I came to it, as well as the history of this watch itself and what it is about this watch that's so special. So as I mentioned, second Seiko entry-level diver created. This is a 150-meter water resist version, and there's a few different dial variations and things that I won't get into too much, but the most expensive versions, I don't know if you can see on the dial here, but where it says 150 meters, we'll see it when we get close up. Mine says water resist. There was about 2 years in the beginning they made ones that said waterproof. Those, you pay quite a premium for those. The water resist ones are the more common ones. However, because it's an entry-level Seiko diver, and a lot were made, they were beat up on pretty bad. So finding a good condition all original is very difficult. I got lucky, and then this seems to be all original, with the exception of the crystal, which was a sapphire replacement from the it was either the second or third owner. However, in this case, I happen to have right here the original crystal and seals, so I do have all original parts in this watch. I also have the one service that's gone through in 39.5 years, 40 years, which was a standard service with the sapphire crystal replacement added in. And that was in 2012. But getting on to this, and part of the reasons for those, like I mentioned, you don't look at vintage watches too often, is you're looking really at the details of the watch itself. So I want to make sure that the bezel insert is correct and original, and based on the font of a couple of numbers, this is definitely an original bezel insert. Another thing you want to look at on the 6105s and old Seikos in particular is the loom. It's relatively easy to see if it's been repainted. From this, it looks like maybe the loom's been cleaned up a little bit, but it has not been repainted at all. And you can tell because, and we'll see this also when we get in the close-up, the loom on the hands and the hour markers all match. And on the hands specifically, there's a small, tiny amount of what I guess you could call like a black funk, which is known in the old Seiko loom to happen. Often, these have a lot of that, and the loom is more or less gone, or the black funk has been scraped off and they've been re-loomed, essentially. This does not have that, which we'll get in the close-up macro view, and we'll see that. Also, the second hand is a stoplight second hand, and it looks like it's aged correctly compared to the rest of the watch, as well as the metal of the hands looks like it's aged correctly, all of that. all the markings are correct. And then to follow on with that, looking at the back, the serial number and case back markings all looked correct on this watch as well. So this was a watch produced in September of 1976. 1976 being the last year, the last full year that this watch was produced. But I can tell based on the markings as the water resist, Seiko, the correct serial number and date and all of that, along with Japan and the stainless steel and the correct numbers. So the case back has all the correct markings for what this watch should have. It also has the correct original crown, which is actually one of the first things to go usually, so that's really good. It's a twist lock system where you push it all the way in and then twist it to lock it, and then it just has this, we'll probably see it when we get close up, but it says lock with an arrow on the side of the crown. So all of these are the types of things that tell me this is most likely, with the exception of the crystal, a completely original 6105. When looking at the vintage watch market, because this was my first vintage watch, I've since purchased two more vintage watches. A World War II era U.S. Air Force issued watch, as well as a 1960s Russian cosmonaut watch. And you always are taking a risk with vintage because it's hard to tell for sure how original it's going to be, and that really matters. The difference between this being all original and in good shape versus either in bad shape or not all original can be the difference between paying $500 or $600 and paying $1,000 to $1,400 for the exact same watch, depending on condition and originality. And that's true throughout the vintage watch world. So the key, if you want to get into vintage watches, is to pick the specific watch that you're looking for, and then you need to research the history of that watch from the different variations of what the dials look like, the printing, the marks, everything, so that you know exactly the history of how that watch was produced and what it looks like, so you can look at everything correctly and make a determination on how original it is. And that's really the key. So I did a lot of background research on the 6105 specifically before purchasing it. So, the story behind mine. The original owner of this watch was in the U.S. Air Force in the 1970s. He got moved to a base in Florida in 1976, and in late 76 or early 77, purchased this watch to learn to go scuba diving. In 79, he was moved from Florida to Texas, put this watch in a drawer, and barely wore it at all for the next 20 years. Every once in a while he'd take it out and wear it, but for the most part never wore it until the 21st century, when he was cleaning out the drawers and decided to sell it. It was then purchased by the next owner, who had it for a very short period of time, and sold it to another guy, who then proceeded to write down the history from the first owner to himself, and sent this in for servicing. That is when everything was serviced. The sapphire crystal was put in. Thankfully, that owner, the third owner, kept the original crystal, which I've kept in the box as well. Eventually didn't wear this as much as he wanted to, decided to sell it to the fourth owner, who also then proceeded to not wear it very much and decided to sell it again, in which I purchased it. And it's actually back to an Air Force member, since I'm in the Air Force. So 1970s airman purchased this to learn scuba diving, and in the year 2014, I purchased it and brought it back to the Air Force. Obviously, I didn't purchase it to learn scuba diving, but it's just such a classic, iconic look, and it's so different and feels so, 1960s, 1970s. The shape of the case, it's nice, really nice curvature of the cushion case. You can just see it's really interesting, and then the asymmetrical side. So it's on this side. It's just one big curve, but here you can see it curves the same, and then it juts out with these crown guards that you see now down at the 4 o'clock position into the curve, making it asymmetrical. And that was actually the first time that Seiko put the asymmetrical crown guards on their divers, and that has carried over all the way to the SKX 007. So there we have that. You got a bit of history about it. What I really want to do is give you guys a really close-up look with the macro view of of this watch specifically. So let's turn it around and we'll have a closer look. Alright, so here we are, everyone. You can get a close-up view. We'll start with the dial. And here you can see the hour markers, nice square hour markers. You can see the lume is relatively the same throughout as far as applied. A good indicator that they are, in fact, original lume. You can see they're mostly squares, with the exceptions being at the 6 o'clock here with a rectangle, the 9 o'clock with a rectangle, and then up at the 12 o'clock with kind of like a dual rectangle with a little point at the bottom. Very nicely done, applied around the outsides. You can see also the metal applied Seiko with a printed automatic. And down at the bottom here, we got 150 meter water resist, and then the SUA symbol, the little S. And then Japan 6105, 8009T. 8009 is for the Japanese market variant, and 8119 is for the foreign markets, but all the dials say 8009. You can also see here the seconds hand, some of that black funk I was talking about. Now you can often see that across all the lume and all the hands and throughout a lot of the dial. So this is pretty good. You can also see that little orange stoplight on the pip, and that's a good indicator of all original. You can see the aging on the hand itself, not bad. And again on the hour hand, a little bit of black funk around the outsides, and same for the minute hand. But overall, very good condition and a good sign of originality. You can see the date window. It's a nice frame date window, and the printing of the minute track around the outside is really excellent. You can see really nice quality there. Really good. And the dome of the sapphire is actually the same as the original. So here's the original crystal. And let's see if we can get in there. You can see how it's domed on the outside. And it doesn't really want to focus on it. But you can see a lot of the scratches on the original mineral crystal. You can see it's domed with that little lip. The same as, if we go back here, the sapphire crystal that was installed. But I really like having that original crystal still. Now, the bezel insert, you can see, is aluminum, 12 o'clock pip inside of the triangle, and then your completely graduated bezel markings. The 10 is one of the ways you can tell if it's an original bezel insert or not. With the print, it should look exactly like that. But really nicely done. All the way around. You can see the teeth on the outside. Really good. So really nice quality. Now looking at the case, you can kind of see here, you get some age markings, but overall in pretty good shape. A nice kind of lateral brushing on the case. It does have the 19 millimeter lug spring bars, which is a little bit different. But you get this really nice lateral brushing across the case. Another chip there. You can kind of see the aging on a vintage, which is really nice. And then you can kind of see here how then it is more of a polished look on the underside of that. So it's this really interesting curved look where it curves very differently than most cases, the cushion case. And it has this polished bottom side compared to the brushed upper, which is obviously quite scratched up for a 40-year-old watch. And then if we go to the other side, you can see it's much the same. You've got this upper brushed portion, which is really nicely done. You can see here it curves into the crown guards. Another key thing for original crowns is the number of teeth you have on each sector there. And then the original crowns will have this lock with the arrow pointing counterclockwise. So very nice indeed. And then if we switch it over, let me do the case back for you. It's a screw-down case back, obviously, as a diver. Just remove the strap really quick. Alright, here we go. You can see again brushed. Once you get to the actual case back, it's back to brushing again from the polished. You can see the difference there. And then a polished side ring around the case back with a brushed top. Interesting contrast there. And then here is the dial markers. So you can see Seiko, water resistant, 693043. So this was watch number 3043, made in September of 1976 in Japan. There's that SUA symbol again, and then stainless steel 6105 8119. And that's all there is to the case back. Pretty simple. Alright guys, so hope you enjoyed that close-up view of the Seiko 6105. I think it has an interesting history. Something important to note of how it fits into my overall collection, essentially, is that the 6105 was purchased a lot by soldiers, airmen, etc., both in Vietnam and back in the United States during that period as a watch of choice. And I think that was really kind of a bit of the turning point when we started seeing military members in the U.S. Armed Forces going from watches they were issued to picking the watches they wanted to wear. And that's not to say watches didn't get issued anymore. It's just that often the military members might get issued a watch or could choose to get issued a watch, but they would rather purchase their own instead. And that continues on to this day. So my 6105 is going to be part of my essentially like military watch collection. And I have another in that collection already. Well, two technically. I'm starting with World War I because that's kind of what started the wristwatches to begin with. And I kind of want to go over the history of this a little bit once I get more of this part of my collection complete. But I'd like to have a World War I type of trench watch, essentially. I have a World War II U.S. Army Air Forces watch currently on the way. And then I'd like to get one of the issue watches from the Vietnam era. And then to me, this is kind of a transitionary military watch in that it's not a military watch, but a lot of military members bought them for use while in Vietnam. Also, obviously, the first owner of this one was in the military, although not in Vietnam. He was in the States. And then the last of those is my G-Shock Mudman, which I think is very representative of the 1990s Gulf War and today's soldiers who some still get issued marathon watches. Some special forces get issued Suntos. But most standard military members tend to either buy a G-Shock or a Sunto for themselves as their watch of choice. G-Shock is definitely the most common from everyone I've known while I've served. So that's kind of like a 5-watch 20th century military collection that I'm working on. I currently have 3, of course. I have my Mudman, the Seiko, and then the World War II Elgin A11 that's on the way. I still need to find a trench watch and an A17, which would cover my World War I and Korean War period. So that's kind of how this fits into my collection as a whole. Oh, before I give you a wrist shot of the Seiko, in case you hadn't seen one yet, first my wrist check today. I've put the Omega Speedmaster on this lovely black leather strap from Worn & Wound. But we'll take that off, and we will slide the Seiko on the wrist. Give you guys an idea of how this beautiful cushion case sits. It's a 44 millimeter case, but it doesn't feel like that large of a watch. It's quite different, and once you fall in love with one, you just can't go without. And even with the Speedmaster, I'm going to do everything I can to not sell this watch because I want it to be part of a permanent collection. So here you have it. You've got the nice cushion case sitting on the wrist. The lugs are really designed right into the case, which is really nice. And you can kind of see how it sits, nice and flat and curved there. So really fantastic. Works really well. So I hope you all enjoyed my review of the 6105. If you have any questions, comments, or anything else, or would like to request any other specific reviews sooner than later, or any other topics for me to cover, leave that in the comments below, or send me an email. That'll be in the description below. And hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.